Hello, this is I Go Travel with Don Barnett. We're up here at the Barkerville area, and I want to tell you about a particular part of the gold rush up here. And that is about the Chinese people that came up here from both San Francisco and directly from China. And they developed and provided the infrastructure and building and business that enabled the gold mining to continue on successfully for everybody, themselves included. And they're a great story about how Canada developed in this part of the country. This man was one of the hosts at Barkerville, which was the center of BC's Cariboo gold rush. Half the town were miners and business people of Chinese descent, and a substantial part of the historic tourist town today contains the China section that existed since the gold rush days. This chart tells about Chinese participation in the gold rushes in the western part of North America. The first Chinese came to California during the gold rush there in 1849. And today, by the way, the National Football League team of San Francisco is called the 49ers in honor of that 1849 gold rush. But again, the Chinese came into California in big numbers after the gold during that gold rush. And then the next three gold rushes occurred in British Columbia. The Fraser River Gold Rush, the Chinese were there. They were certainly there in the Cariboo, and we're going to see the part of Barkerville, the town that was Chinese. And a little bit later, the Wild Horse Gold Rush over on the eastern part near Cranbrook, BC today. The Wild Horse also had Chinese people there who stayed many years after the gold rush working the mines. Now, the last gold rush in North America was the Klondike that people know about in history, 1898, and there were not so many Chinese people there. There were some, but the big numbers were not there, partly due to what Canada had instituted a head tax between 1885, and it stayed in effect until 1923. In other words, any Chinese people from China who wanted to come to Canada had to pay a head tax. And that head tax, that monetary payment, deterred and discouraged Chinese people from coming. The Canadian Pacific Railway had been built. The Chinese had built the Cariboo Wagon Road that I made a video on in this same section. But the railways and the roads were basically built, and Canada no longer felt a need for Chinese labor, and therefore they instituted this head tax that, like I say, discouraged Chinese immigration, including when the Klondike occurred. This is a document of a Chinese person who had to pay the head tax. His name is on the first line, but look down at the third line, and you see where the head tax was $500. Now look at the date on the bottom line. It was 1913, and $500 in 1913 was a substantial fee, and it discouraged potential Chinese immigrants. We do not call it a head tax today, but if you want into Canada, it has been common to pay a substantial fee by immigrants in order to buy into a business. Many small businesses, therefore, you can see, have been bought by immigrant people. As a result, they have bought in exchange for getting into the country. When people realized there was gold in this country, the men came first, the miners. And even the Chinese, who came in great numbers from China, at those days, China would not permit its females to leave the country and go with the men. This gradually changed over the years. The Chinese provided the organization and infrastructure that enabled the gold mining to continue and to be successful. They ran the essential businesses like hotels, restaurants, grocery stores, and laundries. They provided the labor for all kinds of buildings. They built the essential Cariboo wagon road that transported people and supplies, and they also built the first telegraph line that ran alongside this road. And years later, they built and provided the labor for the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway almost every kilometer across British Columbia. After the big gold rush was over, Barkerville passed a bylaw declaring the Chinese laundries as a public nuisance and attempted to shut them down. Judge Begbie, who was really the law of the land, who allowed no American guns to be carried openly on the streets, also struck down the anti-Chinese bylaw against the laundries. He declared the bylaw to be invalid. The hard-nosed, strict head judge of the time had basically a positive view of the Chinese and recognized them as hard-working, law-abiding citizens. The Chinese were not permitted to dig new mines, but had to work abandoned mine areas, and they were efficient. And they popularized three mining methods that other miners followed. They built rectangular boxes called rockers and shook them with a handle. Rockers were bigger than gold pans and also portable, enabling miners to still work in shallow creeks. In later years, miners practiced hydraulic mining, in which high-pressure water washed down hillsides to expose gold. The Chinese practiced a third way, in which they wrapped the ore in blankets and then burned the blankets. And the heat melted down the gold, and they were able to extract gold in that manner. Most Chinese came from southern China, where many people were poor and threats of unrest and civil war existed. Poverty characterized the area, so the map on the wall shows where many embarked from Hong Kong and went to places like the Southeast Asian islands, to the south there, Australia, New Zealand. Some went to South America and Canada, and to the U.S. as well. The exhibit on the right shows how transport of personal goods often occurred in boxes and carried with a stick over the shoulder. Remember, this was the days before mechanization. Intention of many of the early travelers was to return home after the Opium Wars from 1840 raged for 20 years in China. Most had intentions to return home, some to their wives and family. Some did this, some were returned home in caskets, and some never saw their homeland again. With the Chinese came the drug opium, and there were various displays in Barkerville about the opium situation. A lot of opium also came up from the States. The Americans really got caught up with opium use after or during the Civil War. A lot of wounded soldiers, and many of their wounds were treated with opium. As a result, much of the United States was really addicted to opium after the Civil War for a number of years. And many of the Western towns in the western U.S., there were many opium addicts. For example, the famous Marshall gunfighter of the OK Corral gunfight, Wyatt Earp. His first wife was addicted to opium, and he tried to get her off it, but she could not break away from it. And so he, after the gunfight at the OK Corral, he left her in Tombstone and took up with another wife, a second wife. And she faded from history, unable to escape the addictive tentacles of the drug opium. This is a display in Barkerville of an opium pipe. In the gold rush days until 1908, when opium sales were made illegal, shops in town were given a license to sell opium. When I was growing up, American textbooks claimed that China was responsible for the spread of opium. Not so. It was actually the British. Just look at this diagram. England had a trade relationship with China. The British wanted tea and loved tea from China, and they paid for that tea in silver. However, it was very expensive, and the trade business was big. Now, Britain expanded to one of the major world powers. They were all over the world, really, and they were down in India. They formed a company called the East India Company. And in India and Burma, which is now called Myanmar now, they grew opium down there. And so the British hauled the opium to China to pay for the tea instead of paying highly valuable silver. The more opium they bought with the more opium that they paid for, it meant that they paid less silver. So opium was poured into China. At first, China resisted the opium, the addictive nature of it. But their people, the Chinese people, were caught up in the addiction. And when the Chinese people started to move to other places in search of the gold, for example, in Canada, they brought the opium with them. But it had come originally because of this trade arrangement with England. Chinese farming supplied the gold mining community with chickens, hogs, and vegetables. In Barkerville, today, you can still make out the 100-meter-long terraces or flat strips of land that grew fresh vegetables and herbs. Produce was hauled in by the Chinese-owned Nam Sing Ranch, whose land was out near the airport in present-day Quesnel. The ranch was a large and prosperous market gardening operation with an extensive irrigation system and a freight hauling operation. Games and gambling were important in Chinese culture. Games included a 4-person game called mahjong. There was also chess, fan-tan, dominoes, various card games, and lotteries. In card games, a new deck was used for every game, and that everyone felt there could be, therefore, no cheating by marking cards. It was common to see 75 decks or so thrown on the floor at the end of a night of gambling, and then thrown into the garbage next morning. The Chinese people living in a faraway land relied on their faith and philosophy to counteract the harsh elements of living in this isolated, faraway place. Their philosophy was that of Confucianism, a philosophy that had guided China's society for centuries. It was based on a belief of education, self-realization, and tradition. Its principles emphasized things like faith and sincerity. Other principles said learning without thought is of little value, but thought without learning can be dangerous. Another principle said that speech is okay, but actions speak louder. And another one said, a good government occurs when those who are nearby are happy, and those who are far away are attracted. Maybe our current politicians might pay attention to some of these principles. They certainly helped the Chinese people living in far away northern British Columbia. Chinese in the New World maintained a connection with the homeland. They were connected to a major Chinese import-export company whose name was translated as extensive, prosperous, and lasting. A Chinese benevolent society supported revolution for better times in China and worked to repeal Canada's anti-Chinese immigration laws. Associations, sometimes secretive in nature, were called tongs, and they characterized China's organization. These secret societies were brotherhoods that supported Chinese immigrants. They helped with immigrant counseling, traditional ceremonies, and I guess you would say they were active throughout the Chinese community. They also served as community centers, restaurants, gambling dens, and boarding houses. They were dedicated to protecting Chinese rights and preserving both Chinese language and culture. Western medical practices involved treatment with chemicals and drugs, but the Chinese followed a more traditional medical practice. Chinese practiced a holistic system of healing designed to balance body energy, and it included things such as herbal medicines, acupuncture, diet therapy, and special exercises to restore harmony between yin and yang forces within the body. A Chinese medicine diet included things like vegetables, grains, and lean proteins like chicken or pork rather than beef. It would avoid processed foods and excessive intakes of sugar and salt. Chinese herbalists were highly skilled in their medical approach. And Chinese food is a delicacy that we enjoy today. Chinese food is now part of modern Canadian culture. Whoa, look what I saw out my camper window when I woke up in the morning. It is time to get out of here. Weather here in the fall can change fast. It's great country in the winter if you live here. Skiing, ice fishing, snowmobiling. I want to tell you about a Chinese merchant who sold liquor. Everybody knew him as Old 40 Below. They called him Old 40 Below for a reason. He had told so many people in town that the liquor that he sold was 100% overproof, and it was the real deal. And even at 40 below zero temperature, his liquor would not freeze up on them, and they could just keep it drinking. Well, 40 below got a little bit greedy. You could either buy your booze by the bottle from Old 40 Below, or you could buy it by the little shot glass, one drink at a time. Now, what people did, if they bought by the shot glass, Old 40 Below would take his bottle and he would fill it up of booze, and you could have a drink of a shot glass of booze. Now, what old 40 Blow did, let me throw that back out over the window. But 40 Below, after he sold you that shot glass, he then took a glass of water and he poured back into that shot glass. One shot glass full, and then he took that water drink and replaced the liquor back in the booze bottle. He diluted the liquor, the same amount that he sold out. It always kept the booze bottle full, but the thing is, it didn't work forever. The bottle got diluted, and finally one day a fella bought a whole bottle, and it was a diluted bottle. But 40 Blow didn't pay attention, so the fellow went home, went out to the woodshed, chopped up some wood. It was a cold night. It was one of those 40 Below nights. And so he chopped his wood in up and made a fire and went to bed. And then he woke up the next morning and he said, oh, you know, I set that bottle of booze that I bought from 40 Below, I set it in the woodpile. I better go out and get it. So he did that, but the bottle was broken. And ice freezes. When ice freezes up, it expands, and it broke the glass bottle. Well, old 40 Below's a secret about his booze not freezing up at 40 Below, the cat was out of the bag. People realized that he had been diluting his booze. But to make a long run, they forgave him, and he kept selling the booze. Adjustments were made, and life went on. And that is what Canadians need to do today. You can't change the past. You can't keep whining to live in the past. You can't keep whining about the sins or drawbacks of the past. The country did the best it could. It apologized for the past treatment of Chinese people, just as it has done, rightfully so, to Canadians of Japanese, Doukhobor, and indigenous descent. This is a plaque at Barkerville of the province's recognition and apology of past maltreatment. Look at the second paragraph. The apology is for it says, the hardship and suffering our past provincial governments imposed on Chinese in British Columbia. The apology recognized the perseverance, grace, and dignity Chinese in British Columbia demonstrated throughout our history while enduring discriminatory historical laws. The apology was rightfully made, accepted. Now everyone can move on. A country cannot move forward if it selects a particular group and continually apologizes and treats them with special status. At some point, it becomes unfair for those who also suffered in the past, like happened to the Chinese, Doukhobors, Hutterites, Japanese, and maybe a dozen more. Enough is enough. The apology was made so we all can move on. Keep your ethnic and indigenous pride. Now we can proceed. We are all Canadians. We must go forward as the Chinese and other groups have done, equal and together, if the country we proudly call Canada is to survive for our children and grandchildren. If you want to hear more stories and find out more information about things, just Google, as it says there, Google my name, Don Barnett 5090. Click on my name and then hit the word playlists in the middle of the page. Each playlist or category contains several travel videos. So until then, we'll see you around the next bend. Adios for now.